Hello, I'm Senator Rod Grams, and welcome to our November edition of the Washington Report. Now, more than 60 years ago, the Social Security program was established here in the United States as a way to help America's senior citizens meet their retirement needs. Now, today, millions of Americans depend on their Social Security check to meet even the most basic living expenses. However, over the last 6 decades, the Social Security program has had to deal with a string of financial challenges, and today it's facing a serious crisis. Most experts agree that Social Security will go broke early in the next century, putting at risk many people's dreams of retirement security. It is absolutely vital that we take action to reform, to preserve, and to strengthen the Social Security program. And the sooner we do it, the less pain that we're going to suffer in the future. Now, there are many ideas on how we should address this impending crisis, and one of the leading experts on this issue is my special guest today. He is Michael Tanner from the Cato Institute. And Michael, welcome for today's program. Thank you for taking time to join us and help us explain a little bit about what's going on with Social Security in the future.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure.
I guess the first question to ask is the Social Security program really in trouble? Now, we hear both sides of this. There are some out there that says, no, it's not in trouble. We just have to tinker with it a little bit. And there are those who are very seriously concerned that it is on the brink of a crisis. Is the Social Security program in trouble?
I'm afraid it is, Senator, and it's in probably much worse shape than most people commonly believe. You know, in just about 15 years, by the year 2014, Social Security will begin to run a deficit. That is, it'll begin to spend more money on benefits than it's taking in taxes. And anybody out there who tries to balance their checkbook knows what happens. You've got more money going out the door than you have coming in. Now, of course, there's a theory that says they'll then use the Social Security Trust Fund to pay benefits until about 2034. But as you and I know, that trust fund has been spent a long time ago. Congress for decades has been dipping into that trust fund and spending it on general operating expenses of the federal government. And that money is now basically IOUs, and it's going to have to be paid back by taxpayers in the future.
I hear arguments on the floor of the U.S. Senate saying there's nothing stronger than U.S. Treasury notes that back up these IOUs. But if you take these IOUs and if you open a checking account and put $1 million IOU in there, try write a check against it. So the IOU is good in theory, but it has to have some cash behind it. Now, the only way the government can get that cash is to go back to the taxpayers because the money is gone. So to replenish it, there's no place the government can go except back to the taxpayers. So we've paid it once. So basically, the taxpayers are going to have to put more money in to retire the IOUs. Isn't that true?
That's exactly right. No one's saying that they're going to default on these bonds or that the IOUs aren't good, but you have to come up with the money somewhere to pay them. And just to give you one idea, in the year 2030, which is about 4 years before the trust fund expires, that year alone, the government has to redeem about $750 billion worth of bonds in order to pay Social Security's benefits. Now, I believe the bonds are good, but the only place you can get that money is to go out to working Americans and ask them to pay a second time.
That'd be a huge tax increase for that year alone, wouldn't it, to bring in that kind of revenue?
Well, if you're going to do this through the payroll tax, for example, right now about 80% of Americans pay more in payroll taxes than they do in federal income tax. It's the largest single tax that most Americans pay, and the Social Security portion is about 12.4% of their incomes. That would have to go up to at least 18% of their income if you're going to pay it through the payroll tax.
Now, when we say, and you also hear a lot of the debates that, well, we're good until the year 2032 or 2034 because of the trust fund. But as we've mentioned here, there is no money in the trust fund, so really much earlier, and that could be 2010, 2011, 2012, because 80% of Americans, I think, retire at 62, not at 65.
Right.
So if you say 2012 or 2014, really back that up 3 years. But really in about 10 or 12 years, we're going to see the first time that we're going to have to start retiring these bonds, which means that's going to come from the general treasury, the general fund, which means Americans already can start seeing a tax increase just around the corner in order to support. So that would have to come from higher payroll taxes.
Well, I really fear that's the case. To look at how much trouble Congress is having now dealing with the budget, imagine if you had to spend $50 or $100 billion more every year in order to make good on Social Security benefits. Where is that money going to come from?
So where are the major problems today? If we could say, look at it, what causes the problems and what are some of the options out there?
Well, the problem with Social Security is in its basic structure. It's what's called a pay-as-you-go system.
So it's been good up till now. I mean, we're not trying to denigrate
sure.
what Social Security has done over the last 60 years. It's served a purpose, but it can't it can't survive on the demographics.
It's done a great deal of good. It's enabled millions of seniors to retire in ways they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But
So we're not
the
attacking the
Titanic
concept, is what
was
I'm
a
trying to
good
say.
voyage
That's
until
right.
that iceberg came along, and that's what's happening. In this type of pay-as-you-go system, when you pay your Social Security taxes, none of that money is saved for your retirement in any way. Instead, the money that you pay in taxes goes immediately out the door to pay for people who are retired today. And then you have to hope when you retire, there's another generation behind you that will pay taxes for you. In many ways, it works just like any other pyramid scheme. And unfortunately, the demographics are moving in exactly the other way because we're living longer and having fewer babies. There are more and more people in retirement, which is a good thing, and fewer workers supporting them, which is not such a good thing.
So, well, a lot of people believe Social Security is an earned right. In other words, it's if they've put in money into their savings account, they can watch it grow, they can see it, they have their hands on. But with Social Security, it's different. You can put the money in. It's a defined contribution plan, but the benefits can change, and they're at really the mercy of Congress or the government. And I say that because there are plans, or some people have even speculated, that we might have to raise the retirement age, raise taxes, as you've already mentioned, or even cut benefits, and some numbers are as much as 25% or a third. So, I mean, the defined payments can change. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They think that what they've put in, they have a right to get out. But that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. And I hear exactly the same thing as I go out around the country and I talk to people about Social Security. Many of them will tell me that, look, I've paid taxes my whole life into this system, don't I have a right to my benefits? But the Supreme Court ruled exactly the opposite. In a case called Fleming versus Nestor in 1960, the court ruled that Social Security is a tax and a government spending program with no relationship between the two. That means that you don't get a right to your benefits based on paying taxes, and Congress can change your benefits, raise them, lower them, take them away anytime it wants to.
So we're basically at the mercy of whatever Congress can and will pay as far as benefits go. Now, nobody says Congress is ever going to cut it, but if we hit a wall where the money isn't there, Congress might have to take some actions. And again, that's why we're saying that you're basically at the mercy of the economy or Congress.
Well, certainly there are proposals out there that would reduce benefits, that would change the CPI formula so people get lower cost of living increases, that raise the retirement age, which means people would get less in retirement, and other types of proposals, means testing and so on. Now, it really comes down to the question of if you work hard and you play by the rules and you pay taxes your whole life into the system, all you have under the current system is the right to ask the government to please give you whatever benefits they think you should have.
Can we delay fixing the problem?
Well, we can, but not for very long. The fact is, right now, the baby boom is in their peak earning years. The money's coming into the system. We're actually running a slight surplus right now. That's all going to change. The baby boomers are going to retire, and instead of putting money into the system, they're going to be taking it out. And the system's going to go into deficit very shortly. If you're going to act to make any changes whatsoever, you need to do it now. As they always say, you fix the roof while the sun's shining, not once the rain comes.
And going back to talking about, that an earned right, I've introduced a bill. It's called the Social Security Benefits Guarantee Act. That basically says that what you pay in, you have a right or access to, or the government basically owes it to you. Now, this is really kind of a first step to giving people accountability toward their retirement. And I think the first step may be to what we call privatized or personal retirement accounts. And I think this opens the door. And it goes back to the case that you cited in 1960 that basically says people don't have a right now, and that's why I think this bill is important.
I think it's a good proposal, and it'll be very interesting to see how people in Congress react to it. As people have always stated that Social Security will always be there, there's no worries about it. Well, now you're going to put them on record to guarantee that it will be there, that they're going to have to come up with the money, and will it be interesting to see how many of them are willing to put the money where their mouth is.
Now, Michael, you mentioned a little while ago that earlier in the program here that we might have to raise taxes maybe to 18%. I've heard numbers as high as 24, 25%,
right,
in order to cover the costs as we get into the out years of this program. So you and I might skate out of here without having to pay those, but it could be our children or grandchildren that could be facing this problem in reality in 20, 25 years. But there are some that say, no, all we have to do is raise it a little bit. We just tinker with it, tweak it, raise it 2.2%. Make it 14.6 rather than 12.4. Is that realistic?
Well, no. What they're doing is using a concept known as actuarial solvency, and without confusing everybody and getting into all the arcane details of budget accounting, what they're saying in essence is we'll ignore the money that's owed to the trust fund. We'll pretend that all the money to pay back those IOUs materializes somewhere, and we won't worry about that. We'll just talk about the gap even after we deal with that trust fund shortfall. If you really want to count it all, you're talking about 18% under the best of circumstances, and you're right, if we have an economic downturn or life expectancy increases, it could go much, much higher.
Michael Tanner is our guest, and I just didn't want to escape this. You're from the Cato Institute, but some of your credentials, you've worked on this program for many years. I mean, you've researched it, you've looked at it frontwards, backwards. I know you have a book out as well detailing a lot of the philosophy you have. My office has worked very closely with you. You've been a great resource in helping us put together our plan called Personal Wealth and Security and Retirement Act. And so I just wanted to give the credentials so people know that you're somebody who knows this issue inside and out, and where we're going with this. As you know, there are a number of proposals to fix Social Security out there right now. In your view, what would be the best approach to avoid a breakdown or maybe even a meltdown in Social Security benefits? And I think I said earlier at the beginning of the program, we want a safe, sound, reliable, predictable retirement system, Social Security. But it can't have the same type of mechanism as we have today.
Well, that's right. You have to look beyond simply patching up the system. Simply keeping the system solvent is not enough, because you could raise taxes or cut benefits enough to make it solvent and still not have a good system for those young workers in the future. You know, you also have to look at the fact that the average young worker right now is going to get a very bad deal out of Social Security. The best they can hope for is maybe a 1% return on their money. Many of them will actually receive a negative rate of return. That means they'll pay more in taxes into the system than they get back. And if you start cutting benefits or raising taxes, you're going to make that even worse. You have a lot of other problems in the system. You have a system now that discriminates against African Americans, against the poor, against working women. You have a system in which, as we discussed, people have no legal right to their benefits. What we really need in Social Security reform is one that fixes all of these problems simultaneously, that keeps the system solvent, that gives young people a higher rate of return, that fixes the inequities, and gives people a legal right to their money.
I attended the White House conference on Social Security last year, a year ago now. And I think the biggest disappointment after sitting through a lot of these seminars and trying to get your 2 cents worth in is very hard when you've got a table full of about 60 people, and a lot of them, very experienced people. But the biggest disappointment I had is everybody seemed to be trying to patch up an old system. How do we save the system? In other words, the system was more important. And I thought we got to break out of this and say, how can we provide the maximum benefits for you, for me, for all retirees, rather than worrying about the system? So if it means turning the system inside out or changing it, we should do that, rather than just somehow wanting to control or keep Washington in control or keep this failed system afloat. And I think that's what we really got to look at, is how do we guarantee those benefits, but also guarantee better benefits in the future.
I wish we had more of that thinking in Washington. Washington seems obsessed by systems and preserving systems. And I don't know, I've been out there, and I've been to Minnesota, and I've never met a system yet that's come up to me on the street. This is about people, it's about young working people, and it's about getting them the best deal that they can for the future. And I think we need more of that thinking in Washington.
Now, I mentioned in my bill called the Personal Wealth and Security and Retirement Act, and the idea of personal retirement accounts that I've outlined in that plan is supported by a bipartisan group of Americans. I mean, this isn't just one Republican, but we have, many other people, included Democrats, John Breaux,
Right.
Bob Kerrey are talking about it here in the Senate in Minnesota. Supporters range from Congressman Tim Penny to the Minnesota Jaycees. I know Tim Penny has helped working on this plan as well. So how critical is bipartisan support in getting something done? Now, I'm not saying that my plan in its totality or total will be enacted, and maybe some of the other plans won't, but there are the bases of people saying we need to change or move forward on the system, and it really is going to take a bipartisan effort.
Well, this is the largest government program in the world, let alone the fact it's the largest one in the federal budget. You're not going to change it with one party or another, and the sort of demagoguery we've had far too often about this political debate in the past. It's going to take a bipartisan effort, and we're seeing it. As you mentioned, there are a number of prominent Democrats who have come forward with the idea of individual accounts, many Republicans, such as yourself, that have come forward with this. All the polling data shows that the American public, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, race, sex, any of the other demographic indicators, all support the idea of individual accounts.
The president even introduced or reintroduced or began talking again about a retirement system or a change. What did you think of his proposal, by the way?
Well, I'm very disappointed because I felt last year when we were going through, the White House was doing a series of tours around the country on Social Security, and I thought we were going to get a serious Social Security proposal from the White House, and we haven't to date. The president has had a couple of half-hearted efforts in the past. He's introduced them and then withdrawn them, and now, sort of under political pressure, he's come out with another one at the last minute, and I'm afraid it's not really a serious proposal. What he's talking about in actuality is buying down the national debt, which may or may not be a good thing. You can get economists to argue about all that all day. But it does nothing whatsoever to save Social Security. It won't preserve Social Security for one single extra day beyond the 2014 deficit date.
Right. I'm hoping that it becomes a bigger issue in the presidential campaigns as well, because I think it's got to become some kind of a mandate, or at least have that type of an attention so the American people can begin to focus on it and really begin to, they have to be a big part of this as well. And to give Congress the push it needs, I think, to move in the direction. And then we need open debates. And we don't know where it's going to fall, but let the votes fall where they may and come up with the best system that we can. Because as you said, the system we have is failing, and we need to do something. We've got to bail this boat out.
Well, you certainly could see this become an issue in the presidential campaign. Right now, all of the leading Republican contenders, George W. Bush, Steve Forbes, John McCain, have all indicated their support for a system of individual accounts. Al Gore is opposed, and Bill Bradley hasn't made a statement one way or the other on it yet. But I think it could be a very important issue in the upcoming election.
We're going to take a brief break right now. We'll be back and talk more with our special guest, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute, right after this.
The average kid doesn't get straight A's.
The average kid could live on French fries.
I could live on pizza and ice cream.
Gummy bears.
The average kid trusts their friends more than anybody.
The average kid is totally bored.
Totally bored.
The average kid has a lot more on their mind than you think.
The average kid is pretty strange.
The average kid has been offered pot.
The average kid thinks everybody else smokes it, but the average kid doesn't.
The average kid is anything but.
It's my birthday! Oh, it's so pretty! Oh, I told you! Don't be bringing that weak stuff in here! Yeah! Who's the man? Who's the man?
Exercised lately?
And welcome back to our Washington Report. Our special guest, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute, talking today about Social Security and reforming the system to provide safe, sound, reliable Social Security benefits in the future. Michael, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We only have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to go through some of the specifics on the plan that we're talking about, and that is personal retirement accounts. If we allow individuals to set up these personal retirement accounts, would the markets be too dangerous or too risky, and would people not know how to do the investing, or where? That's a lot of the complaints or concerns about the market poses too much of a risk for retirement.
Well, I think that misreads both the risks of the current system and the risks of the market. Mm-hmm. First of all, as far as the market goes, when you're talking long-term investing, the market is a remarkably safe place to put your money. Mm-hmm. There's never even been a 20-year period in U.S. history in which you would have lost money in the market if you just put it in and left it there. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about young people entering the workforce today who will be able to invest for 45 years. Mm-hmm. The worst 45-year period in U.S. history, including the Great Depression and World War II and all of that, was 7.5% average return over that period. Not
annually.
Bad. Yeah. Annually. That's not terribly risky. Compare that with a Social Security system that is $9.5 trillion in debt, in which you don't have a legal right to your benefits. I think that people who say that Social Security privatization is risky are really misreading the system.
And I've said that many times. The biggest risk would probably be to do nothing rather than venture to try and improve the system.
That's right. If you look at it, a couple of weeks ago, the market went down and was around 10,000, and everybody was really worried about it. Well, if someone had started investing their Social Security money 45 years ago, the market was at 159. I don't think they would have thought it was a terribly bad deal.
At 10,000,
At 10,000.
whatever it was. What about the personal retirement accounts for low-income workers? You know, someone who's at, say, $35,000 average throughout their life. How does this help them in their retirement compared to the current system?
Well, they're the ones who really benefit from the system. I mean, let's be frank. The fact is, the wealthy don't depend on Social
Because they're already
Security.
investing in the markets
That's
and
right.
everything else. This
When-
gives others the same opportunity.
When I retire, I've got a 401k program and an IRA, and that's what I'm counting on for my retirement. But if you're a factory worker, or you're a minimum wage earner, a taxi driver, a waitress, you know, that's all you've got is Social Security. And it's not a very good deal. You're not going to have a lot in retirement. In fact, Social Security does not provide you with enough that people say is the minimum level you should have in retirement. But it's all most people who are middle income and below have to retire on. We need to raise the return people are getting so they can have higher retirement benefits, so they can have a much more secure and safe retirement. Finally, let's remember about wealth in this country. You don't get rich on wages. You get rich on investment in this country. And we have a situation where the wealth gap is growing greater and greater. 1% of Americans own about half of all the wealth in America. And it's because the poor don't get cut into that chance to invest. If you're out there driving a cab for a living, you don't have a lot of money after you pay the food and the rent and everything
the
else.
taxes.
And the taxes.
Yes.
12.5% of your money to Social Security to go out and invest. Why don't we cut them in on the chance to get in on that and accumulate some wealth and build something for the future?
Let's give some examples. I think there was an example of, say, a young woman who was a waitress all her life, making, say, $22,000 a year. On Social Security, she would retire in today's dollars at $780 a month. But if she would have put those same dollars into a personal retirement account with average returns, she'd have over $3,300 a month in benefits. So it can show you that there's much more to be gained. And well, what if it was only 5% and not 7%? So the retirement benefit is only $2,800 a month rather than $780. There are some real benefits there for, like you say, allowing people the chance to enter the same markets that other people can with higher
That's
incomes.
right. And think about that mother right now. Maybe she's a single mother and she's working 2 jobs and out there and paying 12.5% of her money into the Social Security system. And then her kids are over the age of 18, no longer eligible for survivor's benefits, and she dies. What happens to all of that money that she's paid into the system? It's just lost. Nobody gets to inherit it. It doesn't go to her kids so that they can go to college or start a small business or something. A system of individual accounts would let that money become part of her estate, and they could inherit it, and it would build wealth for future generations.
And tax-free under my plan. You
That's
pay
right.
taxes going in, but everything you get back is tax-free. There was a nationwide poll showing, well, first of all, many unions are against this. The union leadership is against this. But where do unions invest their money for their retirement programs for their workers? It's in the markets.
Exactly right, and union workers understand this. The AFL-CIO's own internal polling shows that 60% of their members support individual accounts, and that's consistent with the polling that Cato and other groups have done as well.
So where do we go in the future here, Michael? How do we get this information out?
Well,
I know you've done an awful lot of work, but just to...
Well, as have you. You've taken it around Minnesota and you've talked to people, and that's what needs to be done. This has got to be from the bottom up. I mean, the people in Washington here have a stake in the system. They're not going to move until they hear people at the grassroots talk to them. And that's what it's really going to take, is for the average citizen to get out there and do something about it, particularly young people. Now, seniors, they're going to be protected. No one's going to take away their benefits under the current system, and frankly, they're not going to benefit a great deal from the change. They're sort of out of this fight. It's young workers that we're talking about getting them a better system and avoiding the high taxes in the future. They're the ones that have to get out and get involved in this.
Yeah, so for someone like, if you're in mid-50s right now, you're kind of caught. You're in the system you can't really change. You're
That's
going
right.
to get what Social Security is going to offer you or what you've got put away. But we're guaranteeing those benefits. We're
That's
saying
right.
that if you're in the system, you're not going to lose anything. But you shouldn't deprive your children or grandchildren from having the opportunity to make a decision for their retirement. Take care of current retirees and those entering the system, but don't shut the door on the next generation or the next generation to have a better retirement.
That's right. We can't do anything about the fact that we designed a system in the past that wasn't as good as it could be, but we don't have to stick with it. We can design a 21st century Social Security system for the 21st century.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be back and talk more with Michael Tanner in a moment.
Over 2 million acres of our wildlands burn each year, and hundreds of homes are lost as a result.
At least 50 homes were burned to the ground. Dozens more were damaged as fires raced through dense brush and steep canyons.
Flames don't know the difference between forest, rangelands, and homes. Learn how you can fireproof your home. For more information, contact your local fire protection agency, state forestry office, or the USDA Forest Service.
And again, welcome back to our Washington Reporter special guest, Michael Tanner of the Cato Institute. We're talking about Social Security and the future of Social Security and how we can provide better benefits. Michael, thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure.
A couple of quick questions as we close out the program today. We've heard many of the possible solutions that are out there for Social Security. What are the chances, really, though, of Congress enacting the plan, any plan?
Well, I think in the long term, this is what is going to happen because the alternatives are simply unacceptable. We're not going to raise payroll taxes by 50%. We're not going to cut benefits by a third. Given those choices, this is the only way out of the box, is to have individual accounts. So I'm confident in the long term. In the short term, however, it's going to take a lot more political leadership and a lot more will in Congress than we've seen the last couple of years.
It seems like Congress doesn't react until we hit a crisis. And what we've talked about is the earlier we do it, if we'd have done this 10 years ago, or in 1983 when they had the big summit on Social Security, instead of going to the trust fund, if we would have went to personal retirement account. But anyway, Congress doesn't react until we hit a crisis. And you're talking about that's in the long term, or that could be, that long term might only be 10 years away. Does Congress have the political will ahead of that time to do this, do you think?
Well, Congress will act in one of two circumstances, when there's a crisis or when the American people demand it. Mm-hmm. And I do think that this is the type of issue that's so central to what's going to happen with young people in this country that if they get themselves organized and they get on the phone and they write those cards and letters, they can make Congress act.
So if not this Congress, that's the 106th, maybe after the election in 2000, where there hopefully might be a mandate for the next president to really push something very strongly.
Well, let's make this an election about Social Security. Let's ask candidates where they stand one way or the other.
All right. Michael Tanner, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the Washington Report. We'll see you next month. Thank you.